The people of Colares Island had a name for them: Chupa Chupa, bloodsuckers. Between October and December 1977, strange lights appeared over this small fishing community in Brazil's Amazon Delta. They weren't distant objects in the sky. They were close, aggressive, hunting. The lights descended on residents at night, firing focused beams that burned skin, left puncture wounds, caused paralysis. Victims described feeling their blood being drawn. By November, the terror was so intense that people stopped sleeping alone, stopped going out after dark, armed themselves with fireworks to scare the lights away. The Brazilian Air Force sent Captain Wirangue Holanda to investigate. What he documented during Operation Saucer, over 500 photographs, dozens of testimonies, detailed reports, was so disturbing that it was classified for decades. This isn't a story about distant UFO sightings. This is about an island under siege. About objects that attacked people. About a community that lived in terror for months while something hunted them from the skies. Colares was isolated in 1977. Small island in Pará State, northern Brazil, accessible mainly by boat. Population around 6,000, mostly fishermen and their families. Simple lives, traditional community. Nothing ever happened there. Until October 1977, when the lights started appearing. First reports were dismissed as superstition, rural people seeing things, misidentifying planes or stars. But the attacks were physical. People were getting hurt, getting burned, showing up at the local clinic with strange injuries that Dr. Welede Cesium Carvalho couldn't explain. Dr. Carvalho had been the island's physician for years. She'd seen everything: fishing accidents, tropical diseases, childbirth complications. But in October 1977, patients started arriving with injuries she'd never encountered. Circular burn marks on their skin, small puncture wounds, usually on the neck or chest. Victims reporting paralysis during the incidents. Some complained of anemia, weakness, like they'd lost blood. She documented everything carefully. Took photographs, measured wounds, tried to find medical explanation. She couldn't. These weren't normal burns. The tissue damage was unusual, deeper than surface burn, affecting subcutaneous layers, but without the char pattern of thermal burns. The puncture wounds were precise, as if made by needle, but victims insisted nothing had touched them. Just light. Beams of light hitting them, causing immediate pain and these marks. I treated approximately 80 victims during those months, Dr. Carvalho said in later interviews. All had similar injuries. All described similar encounters. Lights in the sky, descending, firing beams, causing burns and paralysis. This wasn't mass hysteria. These were physical injuries requiring medical treatment. Claudomira Paixão was one of the first serious cases. October 18, 1977, around 2 a.m. She was sleeping in her house, simple wooden structure typical of the island, when light woke her. Bright light coming through the window. She got up to look, saw an object hovering outside. Disc-shaped, maybe 12 feet across, glowing with yellowish light. Before she could react, a beam shot from the object. Hit her in the chest. She described it as thin ray of light, greenish color, like laser. Immediate burning sensation. Paralysis. She couldn't move, couldn't scream, could only watch as the beam held her for what felt like minutes. Then it released her. The object rose and disappeared. Claudomira collapsed, chest burning. Her husband found her unconscious on the floor. Took her to Dr. Carvalho the next morning. The doctor examined her. Circular burn mark on her chest, about 2 inches in diameter. The skin was reddened, slightly blistered, but the burn pattern was unusual, and Claudomira's blood pressure was low. She was weak, anemic. Blood tests showed reduced red blood cell count. It felt like something was pulling at me, Claudomira told the doctor. Not physically pulling, but pulling something from inside. Like it was drawing my blood through that light. Dr. Carvalho had no explanation. She treated the burn, prescribed iron supplements for the anemia, and documented the case. But she was disturbed. This wasn't the first similar case she'd seen that week. It was the third. Word spread through Colares. The Chupa Chupa were real. They were attacking people. You weren't safe in your own home. More incidents followed, almost nightly. Objects would appear, sometimes saucer-shaped, sometimes cylindrical, sometimes just balls of light. They'd descend to rooftop level, sometimes lower. Fire beams at people. The beams caused instant pain, paralysis, burns. Some victims reported feeling drained afterward, exhausted, weak. The community's response escalated. People stopped sleeping alone. Families huddled together at night. Some slept outside in groups. Theory was the objects targeted individuals, maybe less likely to attack groups. Others stayed up all night, keeping watch, banging pots and setting off fireworks when objects appeared. The noise and light sometimes scared them away, sometimes didn't. By early November, the situation was critical. Dozens of people had been attacked. The local clinic couldn't handle the volume. Dr. Carvalho was overwhelmed, and the psychological toll was severe. People were terrified, not sleeping, living in constant fear. Local authorities contacted the Brazilian Air Force, requested investigation and assistance. Something was attacking their community, and they needed help. The Air Force was skeptical at first. UFO reports from rural Brazil? Probably superstition and misidentification. But the number of witnesses, the physical injuries, the persistence of the phenomenon, it warranted investigation. They sent Captain Wiranje Holanda, an experienced officer, to lead what became known as Operation Saucer. Holanda arrived in Colares in early November with a small team. His orders were to investigate, document, determine what was happening. Standard procedure would be to spend a few days, interview witnesses, file a report dismissing it as misidentification or mass hysteria. That's not what happened. Holanda and his team started interviewing witnesses, dozens of them, all describing the same phenomena: objects in the sky, beams of light, physical attacks, burn marks. The consistency was striking. These people weren't coordinating stories. They lived in different parts of the island, didn't all know each other, yet their accounts matched. Then, Holanda's team witnessed it themselves. Third night on the island, around 1 a.m., they saw an object. Glowing disk, maybe 15 feet in diameter, hovering silently over the water near the shore. It moved slowly, deliberately, like it was searching for something. Holanda grabbed his camera. Military had provided high-quality equipment for documentation. He started photographing. The object seemed aware of them, changed direction, moved toward their position. Holanda kept shooting. His team was both frightened and fascinated. This was real, undeniable. Not misidentification, not weather phenomenon. Structured object, under intelligent control, doing exactly what witnesses had described. The object hovered maybe 50 yards away, maybe 20 feet above ground. Silent, glowing with soft yellowish light. Then it fired a beam. Not at Holanda's team, but at a nearby house. They heard screaming, ran toward the sound, found a woman on the ground, burn mark on her arm, paralyzed, terrified. Holanda called for medical assistance, documented the scene, photographed the victim's injuries. This wasn't investigation of reported phenomenon anymore. This was active incident, happening in real time, while military observers watched. Operation Saucer expanded. More personnel, more equipment, better cameras, night vision gear. The mission changed from investigate reports to document ongoing phenomenon and protect population. Over the next 6 weeks, Holanda's team photographed over 500 images of the objects. Different shapes, different sizes, different behaviors. Some nights there'd be one object. Other nights, multiple objects operating in coordinated patterns. The team documented everything meticulously: witness testimonies, physical evidence, photographic documentation, medical reports from Dr. Carvalho. What they found was disturbing. The objects seemed to be conducting some kind of systematic operation. They targeted specific individuals, often the same people multiple times. The beam attacks followed patterns, usually targeting the chest, neck, or head. Victims consistently reported the sensation of something being drawn from them. Blood analysis showed reduced red blood cell counts in many victims. Whatever was happening, it was having real physiological effects. The psychological impact on Colares was devastating. By mid-November, people were leaving, families packing up, taking boats to the mainland, abandoning their homes to escape the attacks. Those who stayed lived in constant terror. Children were kept inside after dark. Adults armed themselves, not with guns, which seemed useless against the lights, but with fireworks, flares, anything that made noise and light to scare the objects away. Hollanda tried to reassure the population. Military presence would protect them. They were documenting everything, but privately, he was deeply concerned. His team was witnessing something extraordinary, something that challenged everything he'd been taught about what was possible, and he had no way to stop it. The objects weren't afraid of the military presence. They continued their operations despite observation, almost like they didn't care that they were being documented. Or maybe they wanted to be seen, wanted their presence known. One night in late November, Hollanda had a close encounter that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He was alone in his boat, doing night patrol, when an object appeared directly above him. Close, maybe 30 feet overhead. Large, he estimated 40 to 50 feet in diameter. Disc-shaped, with lights around the perimeter. Silent, hovering. A beam shot down. Hollanda felt it hit his chest, immediate warmth. Not painful exactly, but intense. Paralysis spread through his body. He couldn't move, couldn't reach for his camera, could only stare up at the object, helpless. He felt examined, like something was looking into him, reading him. The sensation lasted maybe 30 seconds, though time felt distorted. Then the beam released him. The object shot upward and disappeared. Hollanda sat in his boat, shaking, trying to process what just happened. He checked his chest. No visible marks. But he felt drained, exhausted, like something had taken energy from him. He didn't include this incident in his official reports. Couldn't explain why. Fear, maybe, of being dismissed, of seeming compromised. But he told his team. They believed him. They'd seen enough themselves to know this was real. By December, the situation reached peak intensity. Multiple attacks nightly. Dr. Carvalho's clinic overwhelmed. The population of Colares had dropped significantly. Estimates suggest over 1,000 people fled the island during those months. Those who remained lived in a state of siege, defending themselves against something they couldn't fight, couldn't understand, couldn't escape. The attacks followed patterns that Hollanda's team started to recognize. The objects preferred certain times between midnight and 4 a.m. They targeted isolated individuals more than groups. They seemed drawn to electrical equipment. Houses with generators or lights attracted more attention, and they returned to the same locations repeatedly, as if conducting systematic surveys of the population. One family experienced multiple attacks over 3 weeks. The Ferreira family lived on the northern edge of Colares. Father, mother, 3 children. Starting in mid-November, objects appeared over their house almost every night. The first few times, they just hovered, observing. Then they started firing beams. The father was hit twice, both times on the chest. The mother once, on the neck. Both developed the characteristic burn marks and symptoms: weakness, anemia, exhaustion. After the third attack, they stopped sleeping in their house, moved in with relatives in a more populated part of town. Theory was the objects preferred isolated targets. But even in the crowded house, with 15 people sleeping in the same room, the objects found them. Hovered outside, beams penetrating through windows. "It was like they were tracking us," the father told Hollanda. "No matter where we went, they found us." What do they want? Why us? Hollanda had no answers. That's what frustrated him most. He could document the phenomenon, could photograph it, could measure the injuries, but he couldn't explain it, couldn't predict it, couldn't stop it. Dr. Carvalho kept detailed medical records. She noticed patterns, too. Victims fell into categories. First category, single exposure, minor burns, recovered fully within weeks. Second category, multiple exposures, more severe symptoms, chronic fatigue lasting months. Third category, most concerning, repeated targeted attacks, severe burns, significant blood loss indicators, some requiring hospitalization. "The repeat victims worried me most," Dr. Carvalho said years later. "It was like they'd been marked somehow. Tagged. The objects kept coming back for them specifically. One woman was attacked 7 times over 3 weeks. By the end, she was severely anemic, barely able to stand. I had to arrange transport to a hospital in Belém. She survived, but she never fully recovered." The beam attacks had characteristics that defied conventional explanation. Witnesses described the beams as focused rays of colored light, usually green, yellow, or blue. The beams were thin, maybe 2 to 3 inches in diameter. They moved independently, could change direction, seemed intelligently controlled. When they hit someone, the effect was immediate. Burning sensation, paralysis, often a feeling of being pulled or drawn upward. Some victims reported hearing sounds during the attacks, humming or buzzing. Others reported smells, ozone, sulfur, something metallic. A few claimed they heard voices or felt communication, though they couldn't understand what was being communicated. Hollanda's team tried to interact with the objects. On several occasions, they used searchlights to signal. Morse code patterns, flashing sequences. Sometimes the objects seemed to respond, changing color, altering flight pattern, approaching closer. But whether this was genuine response or coincidence was impossible to determine. One night in early December, the team set up equipment at a location where attacks had been frequent. High-quality cameras on tripods, radar equipment borrowed from a nearby military base, recording devices. They wanted maximum documentation. If objects appeared, they'd capture every detail. Objects appeared, multiple objects. Team counted 4 distinct craft operating in the area simultaneously. They photographed frantically, got clear images. Radar tracked the objects. They were solid, reflected radar signals, moved at speeds that varied from stationary hovering to rapid acceleration that shouldn't be possible for any known aircraft. But something strange happened with the photographs. When developed, many showed light anomalies, distortions, almost like the objects were interfering with the camera equipment. Some images were crystal clear. Others showed the objects but with strange halos or energy patterns around them. A few showed nothing, despite team members clearly seeing objects in those frames when they shot them. Hollanda was frustrated. He needed undeniable evidence, clear photographs. But the phenomenon seemed to resist documentation, or at least made documentation difficult. The best images they got were of objects at medium distance. Close-up attempts often resulted in distorted or blank images. Meanwhile, the terror on Colares intensified. By mid-December, the island was partially evacuated. Schools closed. Businesses shuttered. Those who remained lived in groups, sleeping in shifts, maintaining constant watch. The fishing industry, backbone of the island's economy, had collapsed. Fishermen refused to go out at night. Some refused to go out at all. The objects didn't limit themselves to Colares. Reports came from neighboring islands and coastal communities. The phenomenon was spreading or had always been more widespread than initially realized. Hollanda's team couldn't cover everything. They focused on Colares, the epicenter, but new attacks were happening elsewhere too. One particularly disturbing incident occurred on December 10th. A young woman, 19 years old, was attacked while walking home around 9 p.m. Not the usual late-night time frame. She saw the object descend rapidly, fired a beam before she could run. Hit her in the head. She collapsed immediately. Passers-by found her unconscious minutes later. Dr. Carvalho examined her. Severe burn on her scalp. Neurological symptoms, confusion, memory loss, difficulty speaking. The woman was hospitalized. It took weeks before she recovered enough to describe what happened, and even then, her memory of the incident was fragmented. "That case scared me more than others," Dr. Carvalho said. The beam hit her head. The neurological effects were significant. What if it had been more intense? What if the object had wanted to kill her? Could it? I started to believe these attacks could be lethal if whoever controlled those objects intended them to be. That raised the terrifying question. What was the purpose? If these objects wanted to kill people, they could. The beams were clearly powerful enough. But they didn't kill. They injured, traumatized, marked people, but didn't kill. Were they studying humans? Taking samples? Conducting some kind of research? Or was this warning? Demonstration of power? Message of some kind? Nobody knew. Speculation was endless. Answers were non-existent. Hollanda filed regular reports with his superiors in Brasilia, described the phenomenon in detail, included photographs, witness testimonies, medical documentation. His reports made clear that something extraordinary was happening, something that required serious attention, possibly international cooperation. The response was bureaucratic silence. His reports were received, filed, classified. No additional resources were sent, no orders to expand the investigation, just instruction to continue documenting and maintain order. Hollanda felt abandoned. He was observing something that could be the most significant event in human history, contact with non-human intelligence, and his superiors seemed content to classify it and ignore it. But he continued his work. Professional duty demanded it. And personally, he felt obligation to the people of Colares. They were suffering. They needed help, even if that help was just bearing witness, documenting their trauma, believing their testimony. On December 20th, something changed. The attacks suddenly decreased in frequency, from multiple incidents nightly to just a few per week. By December 25th, Christmas Day, no attacks were reported. The phenomenon seemed to be ending as mysteriously as it had begun. Residents cautiously celebrated. Maybe it was over. Maybe the objects had finished whatever they were doing and left. Hollanda wasn't convinced. Phenomenon could resume at any time. But he had no authority to keep Operation Saucer running indefinitely. Resources were limited. Personnel needed elsewhere. On January 10th, 1978, Operation Saucer was officially concluded. Hollanda and his team left Colares. The final report was filed. Hundreds of pages, over 500 photographs, detailed testimony from dozens of witnesses, medical documentation of physical injuries. The file was classified, secret, and archived. Hollanda expected the information would eventually be released, studied by scientists, shared with the international community. It wasn't. The file stayed classified. His photographs remained locked away. The testimony he'd carefully documented was ignored. Over the next 2 decades, Hollanda was forbidden from discussing Operation Saucer publicly. Military protocol. Classified information couldn't be discussed. He watched as UFO researchers investigated other cases, wrote books, presented theories. He knew he had evidence that could change the conversation. But he stayed silent. Dr. Carvalho, not bound by military secrecy, occasionally spoke about her experiences. She presented her medical findings at conferences, published papers about the unusual injuries she'd treated. Most mainstream medical community dismissed her work as poorly documented anecdotal evidence. But UFO research community paid attention. Her testimony was consistent, detailed, professionally documented. The people of Colares slowly returned. The island rebuilt. Life resumed. But the trauma remained. People who'd been attacked never fully recovered psychologically. They'd been hunted, marked, violated in ways they couldn't fully articulate. And they knew it could happen again. The objects had come once. They could come back. In 1997, 20 years after Operation Saucer, Hollanda retired from the Air Force. No longer bound by active duty restrictions, he decided to speak publicly. He gave interviews to Brazilian UFO researchers, showed some of his photographs, described what he'd witnessed. "I can't stay silent anymore," he said. "The people of Colares suffered. They deserve to have their experience acknowledged, and humanity deserves to know that we're not alone, that we're being observed, studied, possibly experimented on. The evidence is overwhelming. My photographs prove these objects exist. Medical records prove people were physically affected. This happened. It's real, and government has kept it secret for 20 years. His testimony was explosive. Here was a respected military officer, credible witness, confirming one of Brazil's most controversial UFO cases. He appeared on television, did newspaper interviews, showed his photographs publicly for the first time. UFO research community was energized. Finally, validation from official source. Hollanda became sought-after speaker, appearing at conferences, giving interviews, writing articles. He seemed relieved to finally share what he'd been carrying for 2 decades. But something was troubling him. Friends noticed he seemed anxious, paranoid. He mentioned receiving threats, being followed. Whether real or psychological effect of breaking his silence, nobody could say. But Hollanda was clearly under stress. On October 2nd, 1997, 6 months after going public, Wiranje Hollanda was found dead in his home. Cause of death: hanging. Official ruling: suicide. His family didn't believe it. Hollanda wasn't depressed, wasn't suicidal. He'd been planning more interviews, working on a book about Operation Saucer. Why would he kill himself now, when he was finally able to tell his story? Some of his colleagues suspected foul play, silenced for revealing classified information. Others thought the stress of breaking silence, of going against military protocol, had been too much. That psychological burden had overwhelmed him. No investigation was conducted. Case closed as suicide. Hollanda was buried. His story seemed to die with him. But the evidence remained. His photographs, many now public. His testimony, recorded in interviews. Dr. Carvalho's medical documentation. Dozens of witnesses from Colares who never recanted their stories. In 2004, the Brazilian government partially declassified Operation Saucer files. Released some documents, some photographs. Not everything. Significant portions remained classified, but enough to confirm Hollanda's testimony. Enough to prove Operation Saucer had been real, extensive, well documented. The released photographs showed exactly what Hollanda had described: objects of various shapes. Clear, undeniable images of structured craft in the sky over Colares. Not weather balloons, not conventional aircraft. Something else. Dr. Carvalho was still alive when the files were released. She was vindicated. Her medical documentation was confirmed by official military investigation. The injuries she'd treated, the patterns she'd identified, all corroborated by Operation Saucer's findings. "I'm glad the truth is finally acknowledged," she said in 2004 interview. But it's not enough. Full disclosure is needed. Everything should be released. The people of Colares deserve complete truth, and humanity deserves to know what's really happening. full disclosure never came. Significant portions of Operation Saucer remain classified to this day. The most detailed reports, the clearest photographs, the complete medical documentation, still locked away. Why? What's in those files that can't be released even decades later? What did Hollanda and his team document that's still considered too sensitive for public knowledge? The Colares incident didn't end in 1978. It evolved. The attacks stopped, but the phenomenon continued in different forms. Sightings persisted throughout the Amazon region. Objects appearing, not attacking anymore, but observing. Residents remained vigilant. Once you've lived through what Colares experienced, you never fully relax again. In the decades following Operation Saucer, researchers continued investigating, tracked down witnesses, documented their long-term experiences. What they found was a disturbing pattern of ongoing effects. Many victims of the beam attacks reported chronic health issues, fatigue that never fully resolved, weakened immune systems. Some developed unusual skin conditions, marks that appeared and disappeared, always in the same spots where they'd been hit years earlier. One woman told researchers in 2005 that the burn mark on her chest would occasionally activate, become red, warm to touch, painful, especially during certain moon phases or when objects were sighted in the area. "It's like I'm still connected to whatever did this to me," she said. "The mark is a reminder, a brand. I carry what happened for the rest of my life." Psychological effects were profound and lasting. PTSD was common among victims. Anxiety, sleep disorders. Many couldn't sleep in darkness anymore, needed lights on all night. Some became obsessed with watching the sky, unable to stop monitoring for objects. Others developed agoraphobia, afraid to go outside after dusk. Children who'd witnessed the attacks or seen their parents attacked grew up traumatized. Some left Colares as adults, never returning. Others stayed but carried deep distrust of authority. Government had failed to protect them, had documented their suffering but offered no real help, then classified everything and tried to pretend it never happened. Dr. Carvalho continued practicing medicine on Colares until her retirement in 2010. She treated multiple generations, children of the original victims, now adults, coming to her with their own anxieties and questions. She became unofficial keeper of the island's trauma, the one person who'd been there, who'd treated the wounds, who believed the witnesses. In her later years, she gave extensive interviews, wanted the complete story documented before she died. She passed away in 2020, age 82, still insisting that what happened on Colares was real, significant, and deserved serious scientific investigation rather than classification and dismissal. "I was a doctor," she said in her final interview, conducted in 2019. "I dealt with facts, physical evidence. What I saw and treated was real. Those injuries were real. The terror those people experienced was real. And someone, somewhere, knows exactly what caused it. That knowledge is being kept from us. That's criminal." Her medical records, the ones she kept personally, separate from official hospital records, were donated to a Brazilian UFO research organization after her death. They're now digitized, available to researchers. Over 80 documented cases, complete with photographs of injuries, blood work results, patient testimony. It's the most comprehensive medical documentation of alleged UFO-related injuries ever compiled. The declassification in 2004 created brief surge of interest in Colares. Media covered it. Documentaries were made. But public attention faded quickly. The story was old. The phenomenon had stopped decades earlier. Without ongoing threat, without new dramatic incidents, people lost interest. But the UFO research community never forgot. Colares became case study. Evidence that UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena, aren't always passive observers. that they can and do interact with humans, sometimes harmfully. The beam attacks documented at Colares represented aggressive behavior that challenged the narrative of peaceful alien visitors. If the objects over Colares were extraterrestrial craft, and the evidence strongly suggests they were something extraordinary, then their behavior raises uncomfortable questions. Why attack civilians? Why target the same individuals repeatedly? Why cause physical harm if the goal is scientific observation? One theory: they weren't attacks. They were sample collection. The beams were extraction mechanisms, taking blood samples, tissue samples, genetic material. The injuries were side effects of the collection process, not intentional harm. The objects returned to the same people because they were longitudinal study subjects. Another theory: testing. The beams were measuring human physiological responses, stress responses, fear responses, how humans react to close encounters. The repeated attacks on certain individuals were repeated tests, gathering data on how same person responds over time. Darker theory: the attacks were predatory. The objects were harvesting something from humans: blood, energy, something we don't have terminology for. The medical term chupa chupa, bloodsucker, might have been more accurate than anyone realized. The victim's anemia, weakness, sensation of being drained, those were real effects of something being extracted. Most disturbing theory: the attacks were warnings, demonstrations. We can do this to you. We can hurt you. We can take what we want, and there's nothing you can do to stop us. Message to humanity about our vulnerability. No evidence definitively supports any theory. We have facts: objects appeared, beams were fired, people were injured. But motivation remains unknown. And without communication, without contact beyond the attacks themselves, we're left guessing. Holanda's death in 1997 remains controversial. Official ruling was suicide, but circumstances were suspicious. He'd been in good spirits according to friends and family. Was excited about finally sharing his story. Had book contract. Was planning more media appearances. Then suddenly, he's found hanged in his bedroom. No suicide note. No prior suicide attempts or ideation. No history of depression. Just sudden death 6 months after breaking his silence about Operation Saucer. His family pushed for investigation. Was denied. Police said evidence clearly pointed to suicide. Case closed. But questions lingered. Who benefits from Holanda's silence? Who had motive to prevent him from revealing everything he knew about Operation Saucer? Military denied involvement. Said Holanda was retired, no longer their concern, had no reason to silence him. But Holanda's colleagues knew he'd been under pressure. He'd mentioned being warned, subtly, unofficially, that discussing classified information could have consequences. Whether those warnings turned into action, nobody could prove. One of Holanda's team members from Operation Saucer, speaking anonymously in 2015 interview, suggested Hollanda knew more than he'd revealed publicly. He'd shown maybe 10% of the photographs. The rest, the really compelling ones, he kept private. He told me he was waiting for the right moment to release them, building up to full disclosure. But that never happened. "What happened to those photographs?" the interviewer asked. "Don't know. After his death, his personal files were seized. Family was told it was routine procedure for deceased military personnel, but they never got anything back. Everything disappeared into military archives. Whatever Hollanda had that he hadn't released yet, the most compelling evidence, it's gone now." If true, that suggests Hollanda's death wasn't just tragic. It was strategic. Remove the witness, seize the evidence, maintain the cover-up. But proving conspiracy is impossible without evidence, and the evidence is locked away. The partial declassification in 2004 was strategic too. Release enough to seem transparent, keep the most sensitive material classified. The released photographs were impressive, clear images of objects in the sky. But according to team members, they weren't the best images. The closest encounters, the clearest views of object structure, the images showing beams firing, those remained classified. Why? What's in those images that can't be revealed decades later? What technology or design features are visible that government doesn't want public or foreign powers to see? In 2020, the Brazilian Air Force released additional Operation Saucer files. More documents, a few more photographs, but still not everything. Significant portions remain classified, with no timeline for full disclosure. One newly released document was particularly interesting. Internal memo from 1978, shortly after Operation Saucer concluded. It recommended continued monitoring of the Colares region, suggested the phenomenon might return, proposed establishing permanent observation post. The recommendation was denied due to budget constraints, but the memo revealed something important. Military expected the phenomenon to continue. They didn't think it was over. And they were right. Sightings in the Amazon region never stopped. Objects are still reported regularly, usually distant lights, not the aggressive close encounters of 1977. But occasionally there are incidents. Beam attacks, injuries, just less frequent, less concentrated than during the peak period. In 2012, a fisherman from a village near Colares reported being hit by a beam while working at night. Same description as 1977 victims. Focused ray of light, burning sensation, paralysis, marks on his skin. He was treated at a clinic, documented. No national attention, no investigation, just routine incident in a region that's learned to live with occasional encounters. That's perhaps the most unsettling aspect of Colares. The phenomenon normalized. People in the Amazon region accept that strange things happen. Objects appear. Sometimes they're harmless. Sometimes they're not. You take precautions, you stay alert, you report incidents when they occur, and you move on. Life continues despite the impossibility. The witnesses from 1977 are elderly now. Many have died. Each death means loss of first-hand testimony. Eventually, there will be no living witnesses to Colares, just second-hand accounts and declassified documents. That makes preservation of testimony urgent, recording stories while people are alive, building archive that future generations can access. Several documentary projects have focused on Colares in recent years. Filmmakers interviewing surviving witnesses, digitizing Dr. Carvalho's records, analyzing the declassified photographs. The goal is comprehensive documentation. Preserve everything before it's lost to time. One documentary, released in 2022, tracked down 15 surviving witnesses from 1977. All elderly now, in their 60s and 70s, all still consistent in their accounts. No embellishment, no dramatic additions. Just the same stories they've been telling for 45 years. That consistency is remarkable and compelling. "I know people don't believe us," one elderly woman said. "I've stopped caring. I was there. I saw what I saw. I carry these marks on my body. That's my proof. I don't need anyone else to validate my experience." Another witness. "Young people today, they see UFO videos online. They think it's all special effects. They don't understand what it's like when it's real. When you're face to face with something impossible. When you're helpless and being hurt and nobody can protect you, that changes you forever. The trauma is visible in their faces. The fear never fully faded. Even decades later, talking about it brings back the terror. These aren't people telling entertaining stories. These are trauma survivors bearing witness to something that broke their sense of safety, their understanding of reality. The question that haunts Colares: will it happen again? The objects came once, attacked systematically for months, then stopped and never returned with same intensity. But they're still seen in the region, still active in some capacity. If they wanted to resume attacks, they could. Nothing's stopping them. The 1977 attacks ended not because military drove them away. Operation Saucer was observational, not defensive, but because the objects chose to stop. They finished whatever they were doing and moved on. But what if it wasn't finished? What if it was just paused? What if they're still monitoring the region, occasionally testing, gathering data, and could resume full operations anytime? That's what keeps former residents awake. That uncertainty, that knowledge that it could happen again, and they'd be just as helpless as before. Tonight, as you settle into sleep, think about Colares. Think about a small island where normal life was shattered by something from above. Objects that hunted people, beams that burned and paralyzed, a community that lived in terror for months while something conducted operations nobody could stop or understand. Think about Dr. Carvalho, treating injuries she couldn't explain, documenting everything because she knew it mattered, fighting for decades to have her testimony taken seriously. Think about Captain Hollanda, military officer who documented the impossible, who tried to protect people while knowing he was powerless against the phenomenon, who finally broke his silence and died 6 months later under suspicious circumstances. Think about the victims, the burn marks they carry, the trauma that never healed, the knowledge that they were targeted, studied, marked by something non-human. And think about the fact that the phenomenon never really ended. It's still there, still active. Objects still appear over the Amazon, still occasionally attack. The people in that region live with ongoing awareness that they're being observed, that they're vulnerable. We like to think alien contact will be peaceful, enlightening, that advanced civilizations will be benevolent, sharing wisdom and technology. Colares suggests otherwise, suggests contact can be traumatic, harmful, that we might be specimens to them, lab rats, test subjects. That's a terrifying thought, but it might be the reality. The evidence from Colares, the photographs, the medical records, the consistent testimony from dozens of credible witnesses suggests we're dealing with intelligence that doesn't particularly care about human suffering, that views us as objects of study, not beings deserving respect or consent. Sleep now. But remember, Colares, remember that we're not necessarily safe, that the skies above us might contain things that can hurt us, that governments know more than they're telling us, that witnesses are dying, taking their first-hand knowledge with them, and we're running out of time to preserve truth. Dream of lights in the sky, beams descending, the sensation of paralysis, of being examined, of something being taken from you that you can never get back. Dream of a small island where people learned that we're not alone, we're not in control, and we're not safe. Dream of the Chupa Chupa, the bloodsuckers, still out there, still active, still a threat that governments acknowledge privately but deny publicly. And when you wake up tomorrow, look at the sky differently. Wonder what's watching. Wonder what they want. Wonder if you're next. The people of Colares asked those questions every day for years. Some still do. They're the ones who know the truth that the rest of us are protected from by classification and denial. They know we're not alone. They know we're being studied. They know we're vulnerable, and they want you to know too. That's why they keep speaking up, keep telling their stories, keep bearing witness despite mockery and dismissal. Because what happened to them could happen anywhere, to anyone. The objects chose Colares for reasons we don't understand, but they could choose differently next time. They could choose your city, your neighborhood, you. And when that happens, you'll understand why the people of Colares never fully recovered, why the trauma persists, why they need their story preserved and believed. Because you can't fight what you can't understand. Can't protect yourself from something that operates by rules we don't know. Can't prepare for an encounter that might happen, tonight or never, or decades from now. All you can do is listen to the witnesses, learn from their experience, and hope that if it happens to you, someone will believe you too. Sleep well. The lights are probably not coming for you tonight. Probably. Good night.